Pay yourself first. Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents channel. My name is Jesse Durham. For today's installation in our quotes series, we are going to reflect on the very important principle of paying yourself first. Now, this, of course, will go right in line with those of us that are vetting or implementing the infinite banking concept, because one of Nash's key principles is don't be afraid to capitalize. That's his second principle. So I can remember reading the book, and I would highly, strongly encourage you. In fact, R. Nelson Nash encourages us to check out Robert Kiyosaki's information in his Becoming Your Own Banker book. But I remember reading in 2015, the number one bestseller of personal finance in all time, as far as I know, is still Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And in that book, one of the tenets is to pay yourself first. And interestingly enough, in my life, in my history, the same year that I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I heard this phrase and began to think about paying yourself first, I was introduced to the infinite banking concept as well. And I had someone ask me when I was still learning, when I was still asking questions, when I was still in the book and I'd seen a presentation and I wanted to know more. I remember somebody eventually asking me, because it was getting down to time I needed to do something with this concept if I wanted to make something happen. And he asked me, well, Jesse, what are you willing to pay yourself? He asked me, what are you worth? And let's pin it to a number. So I'll prompt you with the same question. So again, I would encourage you to read Becoming Your Own Banker by R. Nelson Nash. I would encourage you to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and consider this. Consider, is it worthwhile to pay yourself? I think that for so many of us, whether we work for someone else, we work for ourselves, we're in our career, we're trying to climb the ladder, we're out there building a business, whatever the case happens to be, it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day tasks that we undervalue our time and our presence, our input. So here's the question. What are you worth? What are you willing to pay yourself? Because at the end of the day, when somebody has vetted this concept, you know you want to implement infinite banking into your personal life, where do you start? And I have lots of conversations all the time with folks, and often enough, they'll ask me questions about premium. And this is just a helpful tool. What are you worth? So pin it to a number. Are you worth $10 an hour? Let's go smaller. Are you worth $5 an hour? I can actually remember, and this might date me a little bit, give you a timestamp, but for my first job, I remember earning, and this was hard manual labor, I remember earning $5.15. That was it. That was minimum wage at the time for hard manual labor. That was the minimum wage, $5.15. So are you worth $5? Let's just start right there. Because if you say you're worth $5, let's just walk that out. $5 an hour. If you decided to pay yourself first, if you decided to pay yourself $5 an hour, let's say you worked an 8-hour day. Let's say you did that 5 days a week. And then let's say that you only did that 50 weeks out of the 52 available weeks. Are you with me? $5 an hour for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week only, and only for 50 weeks out of the 52-week year to give yourself 2 weeks of vacation from paying yourself, okay? If that were so, you would arrive at $10,000. You would be paying yourself over the course of the year $10,000. Now, for some of you right there, you're thinking, that's too small. That's insignificant. That's puny. Okay. And many of you are thinking, that's a bigger number than I was thinking of. Okay. Listen, I'm not telling you one way or another other than recognize that this is a principle. You can consider to implement it or not. And if you do, move the decimal to the left or to the right. Maybe it needs to be 100,000 for you. Maybe it needs to be 1,000. I don't know. Okay. But move the decimal left or right if that's what you need to do. Consider this. If it were not $5 an hour, let's say you're only worth $2.50 an hour. Run that scenario out. 8 hours a day at $2.50 an hour. 5 days out of the week, 50 weeks out of the year, $5,000. Maybe you'd consider paying yourself $5,000. Now here, I think it's so important to think about this, to think about, okay, what could I break down to on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, some more bite-sized number of I could do that. Okay. And if you're considering this infinite banking concept, you're considering new habits for one thing. I mean, we can't overlook the human principles or the human problems that Nash points out to us. Parkinson's law. We tend to spend all that we earn. We don't tend, the normal person is not out there paying themselves. Okay. And that's why there's that book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Okay. So most people are not tackling and beating Parkinson's law. Then there's Willie Sutton's law. People try and take your money, and they will take your money, okay, legally and illegally. There's the golden rule. There's the arrival syndrome. There's use it or lose it. So these human problems that we need to confront, but paying yourself first is a principle. And I think it's helpful to consider how to implement that in a realistic, tactical, pragmatic way. Consider, what am I worth? What am I willing to pay myself per hour? Okay. Now, once you're willing to commit there, it begs the question, where should you warehouse your wealth? Okay. I would suggest that you consider becoming your own banker, that you put that capital in what I would unequivocally call the ideal financial asset, which is the properly structured whole life policy with a mutual company that pays a dividend. It's a piece of private property that compounds the capital that you put in it, buys you a death benefit. You maintain access and control to that compounding pool of capital. You can access it in a tax-free manner. And all these, there are more than a dozen different reasons on why that's the ideal financial asset. So this is what it looks like in my mind as I walked through this years ago, and how I'm trying to prompt here you as well to consider, should you or should you not pay yourself first? You answer that. I can't answer it for you, and I can't do it for you. Okay. But I can encourage you to consider that. I can encourage you to dive in on worthwhile material, like the Becoming Your Own Banker book, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So many clients that I talk to, they're familiar with that book, and it can be a starting point in our conversations. Maybe they're new to infinite banking, but they have heard of or read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which is really cool. But when you answer that question for yourself, are you going to pay yourself first? Then you got to consider, where am I going to put that? And it's my belief that if we could control and profit from the infinite, or I start to say from infinite banking. Well, of course, if we could control and profit from infinite banking, which you can, but more specifically, if we could control and profit from the banking function in our life, then we could keep that money. We wouldn't just pay it to ourselves, because we all earn cash flows and income the way that we do. How much of it do we keep, though? Or doesn't it almost always just pass right through us and we don't keep it? So what's the point in paying yourself first if you don't actually keep it? Well, enter infinite banking. That's how we can keep and compound and use our money all at the same time. So I really can't believe that we're over 100 quotes in our financial quotes series here on the channel, and we haven't covered Robert Kiyosaki's Pay Yourself First. I know that we've covered other quotes from him. So again, my strongest recommendation, check out Becoming Your Own Banker by R. Nelson Nash. Check out Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And if you would like to have a conversation about what it could look like for you to pay yourself first and how to structure that for you to keep it, and to be able to compound that and to be able to grow that and to be able to use that over your whole life, pun always intended there, then you can have a direct conversation with me after checking out my full introductory presentation. All that information is right there on my website, durhamtalents.com. This has been a great pleasure for me. I look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day. Take care.